Heidi, Part 2. The winter passed, summer had gone its way, and now another winter was almost over. Heidi was nearly 8, yet she had never been to school. The teacher at Dorfli sent word by Peter that she must come to school at once. Grandfather sent word back that she was not coming now or never. Then the pastor from the village came up to see the uncle. He, too, said that Heidi must go to school, and that the uncle should move to the village so she need not miss a day. Grandfather shook his head. "The people of Dorfli despise me, and I them. It's better we live apart." "My friend, if you will make your peace with God, you will see how quickly people will be friendly," the pastor replied. But the uncle said he would never move to the village, and for the next few days he did not even take Heidi down to see Peter's grandmother. Then suddenly one afternoon, Deet walked into the hut, in a feathered hat and a long trailing dress. She praised Heidi's appearance, saying, "I can see she's had good care, uncle, but I know she must be in your way, so I've come to take her with me." The uncle just stared at her. "Some wealthy relatives of the people I serve are looking for a companion for their young invalid daughter," she went on. "No one can say what might happen. They might even adopt—" "Have you finished?" snapped the old man. Deet was angry. "I'm responsible for my sister's child," she retorted, "and she must go to school. Everybody in Dorfli agrees with me. I advise you to think it over before letting the matter go to court." The uncle's eyes flashed. "Be gone with your hat and feathers and such words on your tongue," he shouted, and strode out of the hut. Deet told Heidi to get her clothes quickly. "But I'm not going to leave grandfather," said the little girl. "Nonsense," said Deet. "In Frankfurt you will have all sorts of nice things." When Heidi did not move, Deet found her clothes and, taking the girl by the hand, almost dragged her down the mountain. "If you don't like it, you can come back whenever you wish," she said as Heidi began to cry. When they reached the grandmother's hut, Heidi wanted to stop to say goodbye, but Deet would not let her. "You can bring her something nice when you come home, maybe some soft white rolls. She's too old to eat hard bread." Pleased at the thought of doing something for the grandmother, Heidi said no more and went with Deet. It was the evening of the next day when Heidi and Deet reached the home of Herr Sesemann in Frankfurt, and were shown to the study where Clara, the invalid daughter, lay waiting on her couch. At a small table, embroidering, sat Fräulein Rottenmeier, the housekeeper, with a queer-looking cap on her head. Fräulein looked Heidi over and did not seem pleased with her appearance. "Can you read?" she asked Heidi. Heidi said that she could not. Fräulein was shocked. "How old are you?" she went on. Deet answered quickly that she must be about 10. Heidi said she was 8. "8!" exclaimed Fräulein. "You know Clara is 12. I asked for a companion her own age. This child cannot even read. How could you think of bringing her to me?" "I thought she seemed made for the place," said Deet. Then, fearing there was to be trouble, she added, "I must be going now. My mistress expects me," and backed out of the room before the surprised Fräulein could try to stop her. Fräulein did not like Heidi's name either, and declared, "You were baptized Adelheid, and that is what I shall call you." But Clara smiled and said, "If your name is Heidi, I will call you Heidi." She said it would be fun to have her as a companion, and was sure she would soon learn to read under her kind tutor. In spite of her unhappiness, the first thing Heidi noticed as she sat at the big table at dinner that evening was a soft white roll by her plate. She asked Sebastian, the butler, if she might have it, and when he nodded his head, she tucked it into her pocket to take to the grandmother. Fraulein said with a sigh, "I see I shall have to teach you some table manners," and she went on with a long list. But Clara laughed and said that the little girl had not heard a word. She was so tired from her long journey that she had fallen fast asleep. The next morning, when Heidi awoke, she wondered where she was. Then she remembered the big house Deet had brought her to, and jumping out of bed, ran from window to window, trying to see grass and mountains. She saw nothing but walls. It was as though she were shut in a cage. She was dressing to run outdoors, as she did at home, when the maid Tinette knocked and said breakfast was ready. And as soon as she and Clara finished eating, they went straight to the study to wait for the tutor. Clara told Heidi how kind he was, and Heidi told Clara about her grandfather and his hut and Peter. The moment the tutor arrived, Fraulein took him aside and told him that Heidi could not read. She hoped he would say that she must be sent home. But instead, he had said patience was all that was needed. That did not please Fraulein, but she did not dare send the little girl away of her own accord. And so Heidi began her schooling. An hour later, Fraulein heard the sound of a frightful crash in the study. She rushed into the room. On the floor lay books, inkstand, and other articles, while from beneath them a dark stream of ink was flowing all over the floor. Heidi was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared. Fraulein ran down the stairs. There at the bottom, standing in the open doorway, was Heidi, looking in amazement up and down the street. "What are you doing? What are you thinking of to run away like that?" cried Fraulein. "I heard the sound of fir trees, but I can't see where they are, and now I can't hear them any more," answered Heidi. "Fir trees," reported Fraulein scornfully. "Do you suppose we are in a wood? What a silly idea. The sound you heard came from the passing carriages. Come upstairs and see the mischief you have done." Heidi followed Fraulein Rottenmeier upstairs. She was quite surprised when she saw the damage, for in her hurry she had not realized what she was doing. "I'll excuse you this time, but don't let it happen again," said Fraulein, pointing to the floor. "During your lesson time you are to sit still and pay attention. If you don't, I shall have to tie you to the chair. Do you understand?" "Yes," replied Heidi. She had learned another rule. But for some reason, for all the tutor's patience, Heidi did not learn easily. She grew more and more unhappy, and whenever she talked with Clara, she said, "Tomorrow I must go home to grandfather." Clara said she must wait until Herr Sessman came home. So each day Heidi put 2 more rolls in her closet to take to the old blind grandmother. In the afternoons, when Clara was resting, Heidi was left to amuse herself. One day she slipped out into the street and, with the kindly assistance of an organ grinder, set off in the direction of a tower with a golden dome, which she had often seen from her window. It was a church. Heidi went in. When she came out, she was carrying a little kitten in each of her pockets. The tower keeper, whose cat had just had a new litter of kittens, had given them to her. Heidi was late for dinner that night. The others were already seated at the table. Fraulein was very cross. "You behaved very badly," she scolded, "running out of the house as you did, without asking permission, without anyone's knowing where you went, and then coming back here at such an hour." "Meow," came the answer. Fraulein became very angry. "How dare you make a joke of it?" "I did not," began Heidi. "Meow, meow." "That will do," said Fraulein. "Get up and leave the room." "But Heidi," put in Clara, "when you see that it makes Fraulein angry, why do you keep on saying meow?" "It's not I. It's the kittens in my pocket," Heidi was at last given time to say. "Kittens!" shrieked Fraulein. "Take them away." And she rushed out of the room while Heidi and Clara quickly arranged with Sebastian to hide the kittens in a place where Fraulein was not likely to find them. Often when she was not playing with the kittens, Heidi would sit in her room by herself, thinking of the time when she would return to her mountains. One day she felt she could stand it no longer. She must run away. She wrapped all the rolls in her red shawl, put on her old straw hat, and got as far as the front door when Fraulein caught her. How she scolded! Heidi cried and said that she just had to go home. But Fraulein called Sebastian, and Heidi went back to her room. That night, as usual, she put a roll in her pocket, but she did not touch her dinner. A few days later, Fraulein went through Heidi's clothes to see what she would need before Herr Sussman came home. "Throw this stale bread away, and that old straw hat, too," she ordered. "No," screamed Heidi, crying to stop her. "I must keep the hat, and the rolls are for grandmother." But Fraulein pulled her away, and Tinette went off with the things. Heidi threw herself onto Clara's couch and wept. "Don't cry," Clara said, trying to comfort her. "You'll have fresh rolls to take to the grandmother when you go." Heidi dried her tears. That night, when she went to bed, she found her old straw hat where Sebastian had hidden it under her bedspread. Happily, she hid it in a corner of her closet. Then one day there was much excitement in the house. Herr Sussman, Clara's father, had come home, and everyone was bustling about, carrying boxes from his carriage. But no sooner had he entered the house than Fraulein began to tell him about Heidi and how unfit she was to be a companion for Clara. Herr Sussman listened, asked questions, and said he would see what Clara had to say. Of course, Clara wanted Heidi to stay. That was all Herr Sussman needed to know. If Clara liked her, she must stay. Fraulein was not pleased at his decision, but Herr Sussman told her that if she could not manage, she must remember that his mother was coming soon, and she could get along with anybody. In a few days, Herr Sussman returned to Paris. Soon a letter came from his mother, telling just when she would arrive. There was so much talk about the grandmamma, as Clara called her, that Heidi began calling her grandmamma too. At this, Fraulein frowned and said, "Remember, you are always to address Frau Sussman as Madam. Do you understand?" Heidi did not, but would ask no questions. She liked Clara's grandmamma the moment she saw her. She liked her kind voice and her beautiful white hair. But when Heidi called her Madam, Grandmamma laughed and said, "You may call me Grandmamma, as Clara does." That afternoon, while Clara was resting, Grandmama looked for Heidi. She was shocked to find that the little girl was alone in her room. "Bring her to me at once," she said to Fraulein. "I have some books for her." "Oh, she doesn't read," said Fraulein. "She can't even learn her ABCs." "That's strange. She doesn't look to me like a stupid child," said Grandmama. "Well, she can look at the pictures." Fraulein was about to say more, but Grandmama had turned away and gone quickly towards her own room. Heidi was delighted with the books. She liked especially the picture of a shepherd leaning on his staff, watching his flocks. But as she looked at it, she burst into tears. "Don't cry, dear child. The picture has reminded you of something," Grandmama said kindly. But for a long time, Heidi could not control her tears. When she was quiet again, Grandmama said, "How are you getting along with your lessons? Have you learned to read?" "No," answered Heidi. "But I knew before I started that it was impossible. Peter told me so. He tried and couldn't learn." "How odd Peter must be," Grandmama said. "Of course you can learn. And when you can read the story that goes with that picture, I will give you the book." She gave Heidi her first lesson that day. Grandmama knew that the little girl was unhappy, but she did not know why. Heidi would not tell her for fear she and Clara would think her ungrateful for their kindness. Grandmama told her that she must tell God about it in her prayers. He would surely help her. A sudden gleam of joy came into Heidi's eyes. "May I tell him everything?" "Everything?" "Yes, Heidi, everything," Grandmama said. Heidi drew away her hand, which Grandmama had been holding affectionately between her own, and said, "May I go?" "Yes, of course," was the answer. And Heidi ran off at once to her own room, and kneeling on the floor, told God that she wanted to return to her grandfather. One morning, a week or so later, the tutor asked if he might speak to Frau Sessman. "I have surprising news," he said. "Heidi can read." But if the tutor was surprised, Grandmama was not. She had found that Heidi learned easily, but she went down to the study to see for herself. There sat Heidi, reading aloud to Clara. That evening at dinner, Heidi found the book at her plate. Nothing pleased the little girl more than to be asked to read aloud. But the story that she liked best always made her the saddest. The story of the shepherd Joseph. The prodigal son, Grandmama called it. One picture showed him at home, tending the sheep. The next in a strange land, lonely and forsaken. The third returning to his native land, ragged but happy to be back home again. Heidi never tired of hearing Grandmama tell this story. Every day she learned something new. To sew and make dolls' clothes. To read ever so many new stories. Still, Grandmama knew that she was not happy. One day she asked, "Have you told God about the thing that makes you unhappy?" Heidi said she had. "And do you still pray to him?" Heidi said she did not. Grandmama asked why. "It's no use," sighed Heidi. "For weeks I've prayed for the same thing, and he does not give it to me. But I can understand that. There must be hundreds in Frankfurt asking for things." "You must not stop praying," Grandmama said. "God will think you have forsaken him." Heidi went at once to ask God to forgive her and promised she would not forget him again. Soon it was time for Grandmama to be returning home, and when she left, how big and silent the house seemed. One afternoon, Heidi was reading aloud to Clara to pass the time when she happened upon a story about a grandmother dying. "Oh," she cried, "then the grandmother is dead," and burst into tears. Clara explained that it was only a story and had nothing to do with the grandmother on the mountain. But Heidi, now more homesick than ever, felt that she would never see her friends again. When Fraulein heard her crying, she came and scolded her, saying, "Now that's enough of all this nonsense. If you start crying again while you are reading, I shall take the book away from you and shall not let you have it again." Heidi at once dried her tears. She could not bear to lose her dearest possession. But though she never cried again when she read, it did not mean that she was less homesick. She grew pale and lost her appetite, and became so thin that Sebastian noticed it and tried his hardest to make her eat. But it was of no use. Heidi scarcely ate anything at all, and when she went to bed at night she buried her face in her pillow and wept. Weeks passed. At last autumn came, then the winter, then another spring. It made no difference to Heidi. The walls and windows she looked upon showed no change, and she never went out of doors except when Clara was well enough to be taken for a drive. Even then they went only a little way, and though they saw fine streets and large houses and crowds of people, they never saw grass and flowers, or fir trees and mountains. It was these things that Heidi longed for more and more. In her lonely room she would think of grandfather's hut, of the grandmother, of Peter and the goats, the golden flowers in the sunlight, and the bright colors of the rocks at sunset. And each time she thought of them, she grew a little sadder. They seemed so far away. Join me next time for more adventures.